One day, imagine that you've traveled through time, and when you get there, you change just one thing, one tiny detail, a conversation, a decision, a touch. Maybe it's the hand you place on someone's shoulder. Maybe it's a sentence you choose not to say. Maybe it's just a 1 second delay. Then you return to your own time. But you realize something. The life you left behind, the people you left behind, the reality you left behind, they're gone. As if the universe rewrote itself while you were away. The faces you recognize are now strangers. The streets you knew feel like the streets of another city. The place you called home is no longer your home. And you, when you return, you're no longer living in your own life. The timeline has bent like a fragile thread, twisted, warped, maybe even broken. That tiny detail you touched has become a storm through the butterfly effect. One momentary change has redirected an entire lifetime. And the most painful part is this: no one notices that you're gone. Because in this new reality, you never existed. Another version of you has taken your place. They made your decisions, they lived your life, they made your mistakes, they chose your victories, and you are trapped between two timelines, like a stranger who no longer belongs anywhere. You returned to your own life, but you've been excluded from it. You returned to your own story, but you're no longer the protagonist. And in that moment, you realize time travel isn't about changing the past. It's about risking the possibility of losing yourself, because perhaps humanity's greatest fear is not death. It's no longer belonging anywhere. Today we're going to talk about this. If we traveled through time and changed just one thing, why wouldn't we find the same life when we returned? This question isn't just scientific. It may be the key to understanding how reality itself works. Because time may not be a straight line as we imagine it. Physicists don't simply describe it as a deterministic flow. Instead, we can think of reality as a network of countless possibilities connected to one another. When you touch even the smallest detail in the past, you may actually be changing one of the nodes in that network. And when one node changes, all the threads connected to it can shift in different directions. That's why, when you return, the same people may no longer exist. The same decisions may never have been made, and the same version of you may no longer exist. This is almost like the scientific version of those moments when we think, what if I had done that differently? The universe doesn't necessarily prevent a microscopic change from producing macroscopic consequences. On the contrary, even the smallest change can potentially alter the entire chain of events. Today, we're going to explore how this chain of changes might work, why even a single second could potentially redirect an entire lifetime, and how this idea connects to the reality we experience every day. Because the real subject isn't time travel. It's the possibility that reality itself may be far more fragile and interconnected than we ever imagined. Time isn't a straight line, as we tend to imagine. In fact, maybe it never was. Time is like an incredibly thin thread. It can bend, it can twist, it can break, and perhaps it can be connected again. Physicists sometimes explore nonlinear models of time, where time is not simply a one-directional path, but part of a complex system influenced by physical conditions and relationships between events. When you touch even the smallest detail in the past, imagine that you're changing the tension of that fragile thread. You pull on one tiny point, and suddenly, the entire thread takes on a different shape. Every intervention changes the chain of events. Every change creates new possibilities, and every possibility can lead to a different life. This is where chaos theory becomes fascinating. In complex systems, tiny differences in initial conditions can sometimes lead to dramatically different outcomes. A small change can trigger another change. One decision can lead to another. A delay can create a different encounter. A single sentence can change the direction of an entire relationship. And when you change something tiny in the past, imagine that the universe follows this new chain of events. When you return, the old timeline may no longer be the reality you recognize. The timeline you left behind may have evolved into something completely different while you were gone. That's why, when you return, everything feels familiar, but nothing is quite the same. The faces are familiar, the streets are familiar, the world looks familiar, but the story has changed. Reality has been rewritten around the smallest touch you made. Has time travel already happened? We don't know the answer to that question. But physicists do tell us something fascinating. If time travel is possible, it may have already happened, because time may not simply be a river flowing forward. Perhaps under certain conditions, it could curve back on itself. Perhaps information from the future could somehow influence the past. Maybe time travel will happen in the future, or maybe the very idea of time travel is an echo of information from the future reaching the present. Think about it. Every idea comes from somewhere. No thought simply appears out of nowhere. What if the concept of time travel itself is the shadow of a discovery that will happen in the future? A memory from an event that hasn't happened yet, somehow reaching our minds before the event itself occurs. Physics has a concept related to this idea called retrocausality. The possibility that a future event could influence an earlier event. Maybe time travel has already happened without us realizing it. Maybe someone, somewhere, already pulled on the thread of time, and we are still experiencing the waves created by that pull. Perhaps somewhere in the silent structure of the universe, the timeline has already bent, and we are simply moving through the curve it created. Now let's move into the scientific side of the story. What happens if the timeline changes? Scientists have proposed several different ideas that can help us think about this question, and these ideas may give us scientific perspectives on the fragile thread of time we've been talking about. 1. The deterministic model of time. According to a deterministic view, events in the universe follow a consistent chain of causes and effects. Time can be thought of as a continuous sequence of events. But imagine that you could somehow go back and change something in that sequence. What would happen? One possibility is that the change could create a completely different chain of events. The original sequence would no longer be the future you experience, and the path you return to could be completely different from the one you remember. One of the ideas associated with discussions of time travel is that the laws of physics may have to remain internally consistent. Stephen Hawking was deeply interested in this problem. His famous chronology protection conjecture suggested that the laws of physics may prevent the formation of closed time-like curves that would allow paradoxical time travel. In other words, if a time travel scenario created a contradiction in cause and effect, perhaps the universe simply would not allow that situation to occur. The universe would not be protecting you. It would be protecting its own consistency. Under this kind of view, Time travel would not simply mean correcting the past. It could fundamentally change the chain of events that follows from that past. 2. The many worlds interpretation, the separation of possibilities. Now we come to a much more radical idea. The many worlds interpretation, proposed by physicist Hugh Everett in 1957, offers a very different way of thinking about quantum mechanics. In popular explanations, it is often described like this: every possibility creates a new universe. Every decision creates another reality. Every change produces another timeline. But that is actually a simplification of Everett's original idea. The many worlds interpretation is fundamentally about quantum states and their evolution. Under this interpretation, different possible outcomes of quantum events can be described as different branches of the overall quantum state. So imagine that you somehow change the past. Instead of destroying your original universe, perhaps you would end up experiencing a different branch of reality. The original branch would continue independently. And when you returned, you would no longer be experiencing the reality you originally left. That could explain why. Everything would feel familiar, but nothing would be exactly the same. The people you left behind could still exist. The life you left behind could still exist, but they would exist on another branch of reality. Everett's interpretation suggests something profound. The universe may not tell a single simple story. Instead, quantum reality can be understood as containing different branches, associated with different possible outcomes. And this leads to an extraordinary possibility. Perhaps time travel would not simply take you into the past. Perhaps it could, in a hypothetical scenario, place you in a different branch of reality. 3. Probability branch shifting, a quantum possibility. Now we enter an even more speculative idea. This concept is inspired by quantum mechanics. But it is important to be clear. Probability branch shifting is not an established scientific theory or a recognized mechanism of quantum mechanics. It is a thought experiment based on the way we sometimes imagine quantum possibilities. Imagine that you are part of a particular history. Your life develops through countless physical events and interactions. Your memories, your relationships, your decisions, your entire life forms one continuous story. Now imagine that time travel somehow removes you from that history and places you into another possible branch. You return. But everything is different. People don't remember you the way you remember them. Events happen differently. Your childhood is different. Your relationships are different. And perhaps another version of you has lived a completely different life. Why? Because in this thought experiment, you are no longer experiencing the same branch of history. You have entered another possible outcome. But again, this is speculation. Quantum mechanics does not currently provide a known mechanism that allows a person to jump from one branch of reality into another. The idea is useful as a thought experiment because it allows us to ask a much deeper question. What would happen to our identity if we could somehow leave one possible history and enter another? Perhaps time travel would not simply mean changing the past. Perhaps it would mean leaving one possible history behind and becoming a stranger in another. Why wouldn't we find the same life? Now, when we bring all of these ideas together, something fascinating emerges. Time travel may not simply take you into the past. In this thought experiment, time travel could take you into a different reality, and that could explain why you wouldn't find the same life when you returned. because you would no longer be part of the reality you originally left. According to the deterministic model, the original timeline has been disrupted. You are now moving along a different chain of events. According to the many worlds interpretation, you may have entered another branch of reality. The original branch could continue without you. And according to the idea of probability branch shifting, you have left your original possibility behind. In this thought experiment, the universe has placed you within another possible outcome. These three ideas share one fascinating question. What happens to us when we interfere with the past? And if that interference changes the chain of events, then when we return, the people we know may no longer recognize us. The events we remember may never have happened. Our past may have been completely different, and another version of us may have lived a completely different life. The universe may not have erased the life we left behind. Perhaps it simply separated us from it, because we would no longer belong to the history we remember. Reality would have developed a new order while we were gone. And when we returned, we might no longer have a place within that new story. This is why, in our thought experiment, time travel is not simply a journey. It is a shift in identity, a change in reality, a loss of belonging. And perhaps that is humanity's greatest fear of all. Not dying, but returning home and realizing that you no longer belong there. And this leads us to the biggest question. Is reality really real? Or is it possible that every decision creates another universe? Every possibility gives birth to another life, and we are simply living through the story of the timeline we happen to occupy. Time travel brings us back to exactly this question, because every point where time is disrupted forces us to question how real our reality actually is. Maybe reality isn't as solid as we think. Maybe reality isn't a single option presented to us by the universe. Maybe what we call reality is simply one possible branch, and we are only one possibility within that branch. Quantum physics tells us something extraordinary. At the quantum level, nature allows multiple possible outcomes. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics, such as the many worlds interpretation, suggest that these possibilities can be understood as different branches of reality, and we experience only one of those branches. Perhaps reality is not a single story. Perhaps it is a story unfolding along one possible path, and we are only one version of that story. This is what makes time travel such an unsettling idea, because it reminds us of something. Reality may not be as fixed as we think. Reality may be one possible outcome among many, and we may simply be living inside one possibility. When a timeline changes, life changes. People change, events change, reality changes, but perhaps nothing truly disappears. Perhaps you simply move into another timeline. And maybe the life you are living right now is not the only life that could have existed. Maybe somewhere along another branch, within another possibility, a completely different version of you is living a completely different life. Reality may be far more fragile than we imagine. Time may be far more complex than we understand. And the universe may be far larger than we can comprehend. And all of these ideas lead us to one final thought. Maybe reality is simply one possible branch of a much larger structure, and we are only one possibility within it. Once you realize that every decision, every delay, every encounter can change the course of events, you begin to understand why the idea of time travel is so powerful. Time travel may not simply be about going into the past, it may be about awareness, about understanding that every moment changes the story of your life. And perhaps the greatest secret is this: you don't need a time machine to change reality. Reality is already changing. Every moment you are changing. Every moment the universe is changing. Every moment. So be ready. Because after this video, you may never look at the universe the same way again, because now you know. Perhaps time bends in ways we still don't understand. Perhaps reality expands beyond what we can perceive. And perhaps the universe begins with the possibility of you.